All right. Hello, everybody. And Chapter 7, Wednesday. And let me preface this by saying we are going to need to continue to have me not play music because I did this video with music and I got it blocked for copyright violations, even though I wrote a copyright disclaimer. So, sincere apologies. But hopefully you have Spotify, you're following me on Spotify, and you can sort of hum along with the tunes. I'll mention songs here for you to play, and I'll pause, briefly to allow you to maybe split the screens and listen to a little of the tune on Spotify. It's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but I come up with something better, which I'm constantly working on, by the way, constantly. I come up with something better. This is what we're going to do. So thank you for your forbearance and your participation. All right. It's 1966, and last we spoke, you had been introduced to my favorite Beatles album, Rubber Soul, which was released in December 65. One of the people that album most greatly impacted, and remember, Rubber Soul was important for a number of reasons, but mostly because it was the first album released where it was intended to be a singular piece of art. It was intended to be a singular statement, and it worked. One of the people that most profoundly impacted was a guy named Brian Wilson, who lead singer of the Beach Boys, exactly, architect of the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson heard Rubber Soul, was profoundly driven to create a work by the Beach Boys that would be of comparable quality. And it was competitive, he was competitive, but he was also inspired. It was an artistic desire. He had some uphill battles to fight in doing that, and his biggest battles came with his bandmates and his record company, who basically said something like, "Dude, why are you working so hard? We're doing fine. We're making a lot of dough. Let's just put out a new album, which is what we're contracted to do. Have a couple of hit singles, move on." And Brian Wilson basically said, "I wanna try and make art." And he got a lot of pushback. Now, the next song on your list is Good Vibrations. Skip that for a minute. Go down to Wouldn't It Be Nice? Wouldn't It Be Nice and Sloop John B. and God Only Knows. Great songs. God Only Knows especially. It's one of my favorites. These were all from a Beach Boys album called Pet Sounds. Pet, like P-E-T, Sounds. And I'm going to pause for a minute here, let you listen to a little of those. Wouldn't It Be Nice? Let's start with that one. Listen to that. I'm going to listen with you. All right, I'm not going to pause longer than that because I look ridiculous, I realize. All right, more ridiculous. Sloop John B. Next one up is a Caribbean. Is it Bahamas or Jamaica? I was going to make Nassau. Bahamas. Folk song from the Caribbean, from the Bahamas, Sloop John B. That the Beach Boys adapted. There's your pause. God Only Knows, beautiful ballad. Give it a spin. Give that one a spin. If you're only going to listen to one song off Pet Sounds, listen to God Only Knows. You Send Me of the Beach Boys. Great song. All right. Now here's what happened. Brian Wilson had put together the album, and he was under immense pressure to deliver it to the record company. But he was working on a song called Good Vibrations, and he basically said, "I need more time." He was in the studio tinkering, overdubbing and producing that track. And the record company finally got sick of it and said, look, we're going to release Pet Sounds as it is, Good Vibrations or not. And they released Pet Sounds in May of '66. And although it peaked at number 10, it was a surprising disappointment for a new Beach Boys album, especially at that time when they were one of the hottest bands around. And critically, it got mixed reviews initially. But commercially, it didn't do as well as they were used to. And when he finally delivered Good Vibrations later on that year, the record company listened to it and realized they had a classic. Good Vibrations, you can make the argument that Good Vibrations is the finest rock and roll recording ever made. I don't know that I'd vote for it, but I would certainly entertain the conversation. I mean, Good Vibrations as a produced piece of material, quite frankly, is amazing. And every second he spent and every drop of sweat he shed is evident when you listen to the layers and the details of Good Vibrations. The record company was so taken with Good Vibrations and so frankly disheartened by the poor sales of Pet Sounds that in future releases of Pet Sounds, Good Vibrations, which would go on to become not only a number one single, but the biggest single in the Beach Boys' career, Good Vibrations would be included in future releases of Pet Sounds. I'm going to listen to a little bit of Good Vibrations on my own. Please do. Please do. Please do. I know, I know. And if you weren't listening to the music, that face I made on that couldn't have been pleasant to see. I get it. I told you, Spotify, follow me, listen. R&R number 7. That's what you're listening for. All right. So Pet Sounds. Now the thing is that today, if you look for lists of the greatest albums ever made, Rolling Stone does like a top 500 that it revises every so often. You're going to find Pet Sounds at or near the top of the list of the greatest albums ever made. I've seen it number 1 on several different lists. I myself, it's up there, man. It's up there. It's a great album. Pet Sounds. Amazing. All right. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys had some mental health issues. I don't prescribe to know exactly what the deal was, but I do know that Rubber Soul inspired him, and the Beatles' next album, he had, a tough time because 8 months after the Beatles released Rubber Soul, they released an album called Revolver, which was a different album. And it was not strange then for superstar acts to release albums 8 months apart. Today it would be, it'd be very close together. But in those days it was pretty much the standard. But to release 2 albums 8 months apart is one thing. To release 2 classics 8 months apart is something else entirely. And Rubber Soul and Revolver, rather, was just as good as Rubber Soul. Many people think it is even better. It definitely took the Beatles away from the bubblegum sound of I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You, more toward the hard rock sound that they would get into with the White Album and Sgt. Pepper's. But Brian Wilson was astonished. He released Pet Sounds in May. He felt artistically vindicated that it was a great album, even though it didn't sell that well. And then 3 months later, the Beatles come out with Revolver, and he's just like, oh my God, what do I have to do? I mean, I don't know that that's exactly what he felt, but you get the point. And Revolver, the songs that we've got on the list from Revolver that I do want you to listen to: Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, Love You Too, Yellow Submarine. Let me tell you a quick thing about each of those. Taxman, classic Beatles record. If you listen to the beginning of it, they're coughing and 1, 2, 3, 4ing, and then they go into this great little rock number. Eleanor Rigby is a beautiful song. And the Beatles recorded it with a string quartet in the background, and they proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that violins, violas, cellos, and string basses have a place in rock and roll alongside guitars and drums. Um, Eleanor Rigby's a beautiful song, classically performed on Revolver. Eleanor Rigby has been redone by some of my favorite singers, including Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin, and I still say you can't top the original. Listen to Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. It's crazy. It's crazy how good that is. Love You Too. I included that because, hey, it's an interesting song, but the instrument at the beginning is the sitar, sitar. In the mid '60s, there was a movement, especially when the war in Southeast Asia kicked in. I got to watch my time here. Um, okay, the sitar was an instrument that came from culture of the nation of India. And in the mid 60s, it was often common. The Beatles did it, as did other people of means, that they would travel to India to practice transcendental meditation, meet with the Maharishi. Love You Too starts with a great sitar intro, uses the sitar throughout. And again, it just demonstrates that the Beatles were like, we can do what we want, man. We're the Beatles. And they did, and they made it work. And finally, Yellow Submarine, one of the Beatles' big hits, probably one of the Beatles' most enduring hit records. But the thing about Yellow Submarine, other than its sort of playful, pre-psychedelic, cartoony nature, is that it was one of the rare Beatles hits where good old Ringo Starr got the lead vocal treatment. So it's Ringo on lead on Yellow Submarine. That's Revolver, a second great Beatles album in 8 months. And I'll see you on the other side.